Hello, welcome to myself, Max McGillivray from Beanstalk.global. This is part of our Beanstalk 20 on 20 series where we're finding inspirational people from the fresh food sectors. And boy, have we got a treat for you. Both of us, myself and Todd, we've been out and we've ironed a shirt for the first time in a few years after everything that we've been going through. And also what we've looked to do is I've made sure I've got a American West Coast style shirt just to match him with Todd. Todd, come on in, please.
Hello there, my friend.
Hello, Todd. Now, who are you and where are you, please?
My name is Todd Linsky, and I am located in beautiful, sunny Central California.
Excellent. And what's your nearest big town? We always like that question.
About an hour and a half north of Los Angeles, and about an hour and a half south of Fresno. So right in kind of the heart, right in the south end of the San Joaquin Valley, kind of the heart of ag for California.
And when you say the heart of ag, if you were to walk out, walk an hour, 2 hours, or drive an hour, 2 hours, what sort of produce would you see, please?
So in the valley right now, we have lots of stone fruit coming. There's lots of trees with lots of leaves and lots of great fruit. The grapes are starting to push and starting to see some life. You get an hour and a half away over the coast, you're right in the heart of vegetable country with the celery and the broccoli. A couple hours north, you're right in Salinas. So this is a great spot to be located if you want to play in produce.
And yourself, have you always been in that area, or have you traveled?
Yeah, I've lived here a long time. We've been here, over almost 30 years now. We kind of stumbled in. Produce was a thing that I stumbled into. It was not something that I was born into. It was.
Wasn't it? I was going to ask you. So, how does someone like yourself stumble into fresh produce? Because most people, it's probably casting aspersions, but most people within fresh produce, they tend to be 2 or 3 generations, especially if they're growers. How did you get into this mercurial sector?
Yeah, I stumbled into it by answering an ad when I was coming out of school. A buddy of mine, we were in college and we got a wild hair, got tired of listening and thought, let's go open a restaurant. So we opened a restaurant. We bought a bar. You should never own a bar when you're young. Did that for a while and I decided to get out of doing that. I was going to go back to university and I was spending the summer back in Southern California, and I answered an ad for a night manager at a natural foods market. Thought it was great. Worked 3 to 10. Perfect. Play a little golf, make a little money, go off and go back to school. And as I got there and was working with them, I noticed the produce department was complete debacle. I mean, it was an absolute upside down mess. And I went to the ownership of the store and I said, I don't know anything about produce, so there's no way I can screw this up anymore. Why don't you give me a shot and see if I can fix this?
Excellent.
And I went to the market in downtown Los Angeles and kicked in a bunch of doors and met a bunch of people wearing a tie, of all things, back then. I looked horrible. I looked like I dropped out of a Miami Vice video. And opened up my eyes to what it was. And it was really all centered around organic produce, which I knew nothing really about at the time, and built this retail thing back up and moved on to another retailer and then found myself working on the market in Los Angeles. And from there, we blossomed into creating one of the very first grower shipper opportunities in the organic sector. Way back when there was nothing. It was very infantile back then. There really was no market. Very small.
So Todd, sorry to cut across you. Organics, yeah. That's fascinating because there's some, even in the UK and Europe, organics is still seen as relatively new. But you were involved in it 30 years ago.
Yeah. Back when I started, it was some of the original people that started the movement back in the 70s that really started to get organized. I mean, some of these original farmers were amazing inspirations. And in the moment, young and in the moment in your early 20s, you don't recognize mentors necessarily. You don't recognize people that influence you as much until you have a chance to step away and look back and reflect. And I realized that those people back then were so influential to me today. They've influenced my thinking, my belief system, more than I realized back then. So when I think about that time in my life, I think of it very fondly, even though it was a bit chaotic and crazy, because it was uncharted waters. I mean, we started, at the time, Whole Foods was 2 stores, I believe, back then. They
Wow.
had their own distribution facility in Los Angeles called Shiner Produce. They named it after their local Texas beer. And certain, companies that have merged into other companies now were real small and don't exist anymore. I mean, it was a fascinating time with people that were so committed to trying to drive the ball down the field and really driven by trying to get as many people as much good food as you possibly can. And I love that mantra. when it comes to organics.
So just help me again. What was the catalyst for them to start that organic? And it's interesting you use that phraseology, movement. What was the catalyst for them to start that movement back then?
Yeah, I think that if you look back at the history of agriculture and the way that it has changed and the way it's kind of industrialized, the way chemicals have been brought into it, I think that it was very easy to see what was happening. And I don't want to get too heavy and too deep, but if you look at some of the things that they use from a weaponization standpoint, there's some damage that pesticides and chemicals can cause. And these guys were in the forefront and had been living in Central California. So you're talking about people in Salinas and Santa Cruz and kind of the hub and heart of the organic, ag movement. And these guys believed in doing something better and trying to create a better planet, do a better world. These are some of the original thought, I think thought leaders when it came to that. So it was so easy to get caught up in that and be a part of that. It was just unbelievable.
And Todd, what's fascinating, this current period we're in at the moment. So this has been, Todd and I have been filmed in May 2020, and we're just hopefully coming out of some form of the back end of COVID-19 lockdown within the UK. And Todd and I were just talking about it when we were checking the tech, that the UK Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has stated that one of the reasons why he was so badly affected by COVID-19 was because he was very, very overweight. And 1/3 of the UK adult population is overweight. And Todd, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, it's probably very similar within the US. And so Boris Johnson is looking to try and get a fitter nation. And how do we get a fitter nation? We do more exercise and we eat more fantastic fresh produce, and preferably more fantastic organic fresh produce. So it feels like timing wise for everything that you've learned and for all the clients and growers that you're associated with, they're in a very good spot to assist the health of the nation within the States.
I 100% agree with that. I mean, when I talk about my clients and we go through the motions of stuff, food is a drug. And I think we have to recognize the power that it has to make a difference. There is a reason why we have survived on this planet as long as we have. That's hunters and gatherers, etc. But food is very, very powerful. And it can heal and it can hurt you too, right? I mean, it's a dual purpose. If you don't eat the right food, it hurts you. You eat the right food, it can help you. So it's not a hard choice when you think about it. It's like, and I hate to say it, I'm not picking on anybody, but smoking a cigarette, not smoking a cigarette, right? It's all kind of the same thought process. And food is, I believe, is the exact same way. So I think food is more powerful than we give it credit for.
Wow. Well said. But how do we get over this type of issue? Within London, there's a stat that came out that the average child walking to school will be passing something in the region of 12 pizza houses. And they're all very cute, that they're all selling pizza slices for £1 a pop. So these kids have got their lunch money. They're going and getting and eating pizza rather than having fresh produce. So this age-old conundrum, Todd, how can we educate the consumer, whether they be young or old, that actually eating fresh produce and organic fresh produce is good for them, rather than going for these big brands that have been promoted, whether it be via social media or billboards or peer influence? How do we get the consumer to eat more fresh produce?
It's a great question. And I'm a very big believer that one of the things that all produce people need to be responsible for is increasing consumption. Whether it's organic produce, conventional produce, biodynamic, it doesn't matter. It's about increasing consumption. And I think that we have to put energy in to the next generation of shopper as we speak to the current generation of shopper, because children influence their parents. And we need to work with messaging. We need to work to educate the next generation. We can't, you're not going to fix everything that's happening now, but you can certainly make a proactive stance about what might be happening tomorrow. And I think in the current situation that we're in, as we talked about earlier, one of the things that I've noticed is more families spending more time together because everybody has a little bit of a break on. So people are cooking more, and that needs to become something that's more positive. Cooking is not hard to do. Making toast is easy, right? But making toast with a tomato on it and perhaps a nice slice of cheese or a nice piece of meat, it's not any harder, right? And I think that to me, one of the areas that I really, really want to stress that I think we need to work on is just even look at school lunches. For school lunches, a children's exposure to fish is a fish stick.
Oh my
right?
God. Oh.
Right. It's breaded. It's this. It's that. It's not a beautiful fillet of salmon. It's not a, it's not something that actually, if we started young, if people were used to eating, they would just keep moving down that field, I believe. So I think we have an obligation to really grasp the youth.
But Todd, you know, I completely agree with you. But isn't the problem here money? So the likes of that school scenario within the UK, the schools have a tiny amount
Mm-hmm.
per pupil to feed them, and so they're just presumably going on to an online menu of a caterer and just going for the cheapest product that they can buy. And
Absolutely.
likewise the retailer, the retailers, especially within the UK, my view is that they don't allow branded fresh produce, because they don't want that grower to be able to negotiate a better margin return from them. And they're using that fresh produce as the sort of the market garden to get people in to buy the
Right.
produce that they want, and then to go buy the high ticket items, the ready meals, the bottle of wine, the energy drinks, where the retailers make more money. And
Right.
that's just short term shareholder gain in some respects. So how can we influence the likes of the schools to spend more money, and the retailers perhaps to put more emphasis on fresh produce, and rather than chasing the buck?
Yeah. Two kind of questions you threw at me right there. The first one is, I think you have to take a hard look at the cost of healthcare versus the cost of improving your nutrition supply
Yeah.
through the school. So I think that, that abacus needs to come out. And we need to do that math. And I don't necessarily think that the changes they have to make are that monumental. I think they could make some really small, simple changes that make sense. Peaches packed in sugar aren't necessarily the best avenue of approach, right? But fresh peaches are. Peaches packed in a way that's healthier and safer, that doesn't have that sugar load to it, I think it's worth. And when it comes to the retail sector, I agree with where you're heading. I think there's a real danger in always chasing to the bottom. I think it's very important that we have to step back and say that there is a positive cost associated with producing good food. And we need to recognize that the supply chain has an obligation to talk about that. It's not about who can be the cheapest. We have to stop doing that with our food supply, which is why you have some of the food that's in the supply chain you have now.
Yeah, yeah, and Todd, linking back the organic movement, to use that word again, that movement that you got involved with 30 years ago. I'm going to go off on a slight tangent here, but bear with me.
Yep.
I heard an article the other day that there's a tribe in Brazil somewhere, and when they have to make a huge decision about the tribe, the infrastructure, where it's going, the thing they look at is how it is going to affect the seventh generation of that tribe. It is that far down the line that they're looking. And really, isn't this where we should be now? Rather than retailers looking at what their shareholder return is going to be 6 months, a year down the line, they're in an amazing position to actually do good in the long term, rather than just trying to get short term. So what am I trying to say? We've got to set up this food supply system so it is long term gain for everyone, especially on a health perspective. And you just sort of courted over it. That if we can get people's health better, there's going to be less need for people to go into hospitals with type 2 diabetes and obesity.
Absolutely.
and.
Absolutely. I mean, you're looking at it now, just from the statistics now in the current situation we're in, where certain sectors of the population are having more problems. To your point about Boris Johnson, they're having more problems because of existing health conditions. How much of that can we fix by early education, early understanding of the power that everything you ingest in your body is? Everything that you take inside your body has some kind of repercussion or effects one way, positively or negatively, and you do that your entire life. And it's really, sunshine, water, and food are the three things that really connect this entire planet.
Yeah. We are what we eat.
We are indeed.
Okay, so just you mentioned an interesting point about trying to persuade the grower to educate people to consume more. Is that actually their job, or should that be the job of the retailer or the restaurant owner or the food chain?
I think it's everybody's job, but I think that again, I think it comes down to trying to really focus messaging around increasing consumption, and not necessarily I look at it this way: if I can get somebody to eat more apples, I take that as a win. Now my job is to try to convince them to eat an organic apple, right? So that's where that comes from, right? If think about it, if you could take 100 kids right now in London and put them on a diet of grains and fruits and vegetables, I mean, just, not even anything crazy, but just a simplified diet, where would they be in months on that program? We know what the difference is, right? I mean, we've seen it. There was the story of the family was it Switzerland? They did an all organic diet for 7 or 14 days, and they filmed the whole thing. And you could see the physical transformation of the family over the course of time. So it's powerful.
So Todd, am I slightly being naive and perhaps old school, thinking it's got to be the retailer that's creating the influence, when actually the influence has got to come from the consumer? Because we are seeing a big drive towards plant-based, vegan-based, organic-based. So especially with everything that we're going through now, as to reiterate it, that if we're eating well, it's going to put us in a better position health-wise. So actually, isn't it the consumer in some ways is doing the job for us and influencing their families and their colleagues and their peers to eat better? So isn't the market coming towards us?
It is, and I think it is, because I think the consumer in the past has really expected the retailer to do the heavy lifting for them, to do the figure out, does broccoli grow in the back room? Well, now they understand that it doesn't, right? They understand that there's a life cycle to it and where it comes from. And I think that I believe that the organic produce movement in the United States has really helped educate people more about food, because it's been the backbone, really, I think, of the growth of the sector here in the States has been based off of what produce has done, and the trajectory from produce has pushed a lot of the other sectors along. So, yeah.
And Todd, I think you've got to be applauded by your generosity in some respects of giving that example of 100 kids in London eating 100 apples and not demanding from day one that they eat organic, that they might come into it again by influence. I think that's so pleasing to hear that you don't want to be a zealot over what you believe is right, but it's right, but you believe that if people are educated, they'll come to your way of thinking.
I do. I think that we've got to get people to eat smarter. I mean, here in the States, if you take a look at the corn syrup industry, which is a byproduct of, farm bills and some things that happen, we created an industry that, it has a purpose, but it's not really helping a lot of people. I don't want to get in trouble with the corn syrup lobby, because I'm sure they'll call, but nonetheless, the reality is the reality, and that, we need to do better for ourselves, and we need to demand better of ourselves. And I think that I like to think that it's going to start happening because of the situation we're currently in, that children are getting more involved in the decisions because they don't have a lot of go out to eat options. That's not happening right now. And some of these things are going along. So I'm very optimistic.
And just as a nice segue, could you just explain the background to the picture behind you, please?
I love my picture. That is a picture that I had given to me when I took my daughter's preschool class out to the farm for a tour. And a very long time, she's 30 now, so it was a long time ago. And so to me, it was, back when I really realized when you stand around a bunch of kids that age and you talk to them about what's growing and you let them sample something, you see the look on their face. That was one of the pivotal moments for me. It struck me. It's like, consumption, youth, very important. So they made that for me, and I have it framed. It's been hanging up in my office ever since, and it's a Picasso to me.
Oh no, it's fantastic. We were having the obligatory Zoom quiz last night with friends and family, and one of the questions came out was, what was the best meal that you've ever had? And it actually distilled down to the fact of it wasn't just the food, it was the theatre, it was outside, it was overseas in an amazing location, and that's what made that particular meal great. You look at it within fresh food, and that connection, that if a young person, a kid, has been out to a field and pulled out a carrot from the ground and actually seen where it's from, then the parents, or they might have influenced mum and dad to go buy a carrot, and they might have been involved in the preparation and tasted it, and knowing that connect, and the whole theatre and the excitement of that. So that absolutely. And so there's a stat I get bored of saying it myself. 6 out of 10 kids don't know where fresh produce comes from. So there's a whole educational piece there. But hopefully, as we're going through this, you corrected me earlier, this new norm, the reset that we're going through, and people eating more at home and kids getting more involved with that cooking, they'll perhaps have a better understanding as to where food comes from. So Todd, on that side, let's predict the future. You've got 30 years of experience of assisting, influencing some really major and interesting businesses in the States, in fresh food, in organics. In the next 3 to 5 years, I know we're living slightly day by day at the moment, but where do you think this is going? When one of your contacts says, "Todd, I don't know where to go with our business. Do we stay in organics? Do we get out? Do we go into fish? Do we go into this? What would your advice be to try and make them prosper and do good for the next 3 to 5 years?"
That's a great question. That's a tough question really to answer. My advice to everybody is right now is to stop running towards the fire and take a step back for a second. Right. And I love, one of the quotes that came out of your South African talk that, I had the good fortune to listen to, crisis can present positives too. Right. And I think that you've got to take a step back. And to me, I think food is going to become more important. I think that there is a clean slate to some degree that producers have an opportunity now to really start to speak to their consumers and to work with their retailers and to work with their e-commerce and to work with people to put some personality back into food and to give it, a voice again. And, again, it goes back to that running to the fire. If we keep running forward at 100 miles an hour, we certainly miss a lot of things. I say it all the time to people. I'd rather do 10 things at 100% than 100 things at 10. And I think when it comes to fresh food, I think it's going to be very, very important that obviously things are going to change. We're going to adapt, right? I mean, who knows what the current produce department may look like. It may be completely under plastic. It may have a sneeze guard. Who knows? But people are listening to the doctors. They're listening to the scientists. They're listening to their own selves. They're listening to their family and friends, and they recognize the importance of food. And I think we need to capitalize on that. That's the advice I have, is keep that messaging front and center and make people realize the good things that you bring.
So just bring it through to present day where the States is. So just rough figures that 50% of all Americans tend to eat out. So 50% of all food consumed in America is on an eaten out basis. That currently isn't happening because the restaurants, like in the UK, are closed, and it's been well publicised that that's created a big issue within your food supply chain and ours within the UK and Europe. That say onions, that specific growers will grow catering onions to go through a catering processing machine. Those onions are too big to go into retail side, and those growers can't move quick enough. They can't pivot quick enough to move from food service to retail. So if you've got one of your customers, one of your contacts asking you what they should be doing in the short term, is there an answer? Is there a logistical answer to that? Or do you think the food service is going to come back relatively quickly? What do you think?
Well, the restaurants here have been, restaurants are allowed to have been open and doing takeaway food, takeout food, curbside pickup, etc. They're starting to reopen. But you're right. There's growers that specifically work in the food service sector that I feel for them every single day, because it's just been a devastating, punch to the nose, because they didn't see it coming. And then when it came, there was no transition. There was just breaks. And so I think there is going to be, unfortunately, some people that are going to have some hard times ahead and may not get through some of this because of what their business model is. I do believe that people, and what I'm seeing here in the States, when I look at abroad, people want to get back to their lives. People want to get back to a robust economy. People want to get back to soccer games. People want to get back to watching their kids at the park. People want to go to the beach. I mean, that's going to continue to be the desire of everyone. So I think that the food service thing will come back, but I think that because of the way the new normal may pretend to be, are you going to have 40% of the food service outlets not survive, and then that remaining balance can only, hold 40% of what they used to have? I think it's still a little bit too early to fully understand, but I do think it's going to inch its way back. But some of these guys have done a great job of pivoting. I go into some of the retailers now because I try to stay abreast of what's happening in the stores, if not on a bi-weekly basis, just to hear, plus the people I have out that I can communicate with. We're seeing a lot of different pack styles in the store now. You're seeing a lot of tomatoes that would have gone to food service that are just in a straight, almost generic white box with a Snap-on sticker. Retailers are trying to be supportive and trying to help everybody they can, which I think is fabulous. It's a tough one to predict, Max. It really is. But I think we will see things start to move in a more positive direction for the food service sector.
Well said. I think when we take the heat and the emotion out of this current situation, I got to reiterate what we said earlier. It just feels that if the message can be presented correctly, especially on an organics basis, that if you can get the produce and you can afford it, stop smoking, stop drinking, spend that money on decent fresh produce and live forever. Yeah.
And people will draw a line in the sand with thinking like that sometimes. I love, which is a wonderful thing about our world. People get to have their own opinions, but at the end of the day, it's tough to say that doing this is a good thing, doing this is a bad thing, and can you mitigate some of that risk and factors? I think it's worthy of a conversation. And I love the fact that, to me, I would love to see the schools start to plant that seed because they're so influential to our youth. I mean, everything that they learn, I shouldn't say everything, but a lot of what they learn happens during that school day. And I think that we can make some positive influences. I mean, I love the schools that are doing some edible gardens that are pulling the kids into that thought process, because again, it's, you may not be able to fix, the likes of you and me and what we think about, but we can certainly do a pretty good job of helping people, the youth, get a different foothold and change this world for the better by putting some effort out today.
Well done. So if you're in front of a school group or perhaps a university group, and these kids, younger people, didn't have a full understanding as to the excitement of fresh produce, and you were there to tell them about why they should be aligned to this amazing sector, what would you say to them? What would be the takeaways? Why should people get involved with fresh produce, this international amazing sector of fresh produce? Why should people get involved with fresh produce?
Well, if you're going to go talk to youth, if you want to talk about produce, you can't, in my opinion, you can't do it without walking in and giving somebody a sample. You can't, if you don't hand them a slice of apple and then start your conversation, I think you're playing to a pretty deaf crowd. But the bottom line issue is, like I said earlier, food is a drug. And I think you frame up the argument of the importance of that. It's just hard to sit there and argue with a glass of water and a sugary soda. Right. I mean, it's just hard to argue with the pros and cons of each. It is what it is. Right. So to me, I think that's the angle that you have to take, is to make them realize the importance of the choices that we are allowed to make. Right. Because that's what it comes down to. It's the choices we're allowed to make. Eating a banana, not eating a banana, eating lettuce, not eating lettuce. Those are all choices. And I understand food insecurity. I understand food deserts. Which is why I'm such a technology fan now in the ag space, and have really embraced some of that because of the food desert issues that we start to see and the importance that technology is bringing to the table today. So to me, I guess, to go back to your original question, hey, start sampling stuff and then start the conversation.
Fantastic. And Todd, just to wrap up, if it's okay to ask, and without breaking any confidence, what are some of the more interesting projects that you're involved in within fresh food?
Yeah, I'm really like ag tech. I'm really fascinated by, what I kind of call organic 2.0. I think that what these guys are doing, and it's what some of these guys are doing with an aquaponics format, hydroponic formats, aeroponics. I mean, to be able to, in my mind, to think that you can put and grow organic produce in the middle of Sahara Desert, with using 1/30th the amount of water that it takes to grow, it's fascinating to me. And I look at it like, these are the why not things out there in agriculture. Why not go do that? Why not expand upon that? So to me, that's super exciting. I've got a project we're working that I'm learning about, kind of almost full circle, because it's an aquaponic project, and with obviously growing fish and doing fish. And it's ironic because my father back in the 70s was one of the innovators in Hawaii with the aquaponic industry. So it's almost a full circle.
Wow.
So that's really fascinating to me to see that life cycle. But I've had good fortune of working with some of these new startup technologies that are backed by, lots of money, and they're moving the ball down the field. And I find it just fascinating to me, because I think we can expand that reach. We can start having those conversations in places we couldn't have before.
And Todd, that's fascinating that if it's the right word, that philanthropic approach, that there are people that might have made their money in general industry who actually now want to do good, and by doing good, they want to be innovators within food to make food growing more efficient and perhaps bring down the cost, but increase the viability, the organic nature of it to feed the world. Yeah,
Feed the world.
What a sector to be in.
Well, it's interesting because it goes back to what I said earlier about my original getting my foot in the door in this, in organics. And one of the things that I remember sitting around in a room with a bunch of these innovators and these thought thinkers and these original farming guys that were, doing it when it was not easy to do, and one of the things that they always talked about was feeding the world better food, and I just keep that in the back of my mind. It's just super, super important. So you're right. I think when it comes to some of these new technologies, it embraces that exact same thing, that we are going to have to evolve. Look, you don't see a payphone any longer on the street corner, right? We evolved. There's not a lot of draft horses pulling plows anymore. We've evolved. And agriculture and technology is evolving. And I think that you still have to have your standards. You have to have your rules. You have to do things right. You just can't have it a free-for-all because it's food and it needs to not have a free-for-all. But I think we can't look away from the fact how important that these new industries are going to be. And believe me, there's people that don't like what I'm saying because they feel it's a threat and this, and I understand that and I respect that. But again, I go back to my original point. Go find me a payphone to make a cell phone. It's just not going to happen anymore, right?
Todd, it is evolution, not revolution, and you got to you got to be part of it and go with it because it's going to be fascinating and it will help feed the world and feed the world better food.
Yeah, I read what they're doing, in the Middle East right now, and some of these projects, it's great. I see no downside to giving people good, healthy food, that is available to them year round, that can literally change. I mean, again, it goes back to how much money you offsetting in healthcare costs by getting people on the right trajectory from a food standpoint.
Everyone, this is why I was very keen so you could meet Todd and see the influencer that he is, not only within the US, but also I think on a global perspective. So if you want to get in touch with Todd, we'll make sure we got all the links on the various social media platforms that we push this out on. Fascinating guy. Todd, thank you very, very much. It's been an honor to have you on.
Oh, my friend, thank you so much. What a great chance to see you again and get to talk to you. I truly appreciate you giving me the platform and the forum and spending time. Next time we're going to do it together, though. We'll do it in the pub next time. I'll come see you and we'll have a pint and we'll do it the right way.
And next time, when we do this online, we must have our dogs. We're missing our dogs.
I know. I'm not used to not having my dog in the office, but I figured, Murphy's Law, as soon as I get you on screen, she's not going to be very happy. So I kicked her outside today.
Excellent. Todd, thank you very much. You keep safe.
Thank you, my friend.
All the best.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.